Three men went into that warehouse in Cicero on a Wednesday morning. One walked out on his own. The second was dragged out by paramedics. The third was zip-tied to a support beam with his own restraints, waiting for someone to decide what to do with him. The woman they had kidnapped was standing outside the warehouse door in a florist's apron, still dusted with dried petal debris, one earring missing, completely calm, holding a set of car keys she had taken as a precaution. This is where the story ends. Now let me tell you how it started, and what it cost Felix Rourke to learn the difference between a soft target and a woman who had spent 4 years as a combat medic attached to a special operations unit in Kandahar. Rosa Mancini ran the smallest flower shop on West Huron Street, wedged between a dry cleaner and a deli that had smelled permanently of pastrami for as long as anyone could remember. She was 34, brown-eyed, with full hips and round arms, and the kind of unhurried presence that filled a room without announcing itself. Her size neither apologized for nor remarked upon, simply part of who she was, the way her quick hands were, and the habit she had of humming quietly when she worked. She had opened Mancini Blooms 6 years ago with money saved during 2 overseas deployments, where she had served as an Army combat medic. She knew how to set a dislocated shoulder in the dark. She knew how to neutralize a man twice her weight using joint manipulation techniques she had drilled until they were reflex rather than thought. She also knew how to arrange peonies in a way that made grown men go quiet and reach for their wallets. These two things about Rosa Mancini, the flowers and the training, had never occupied the same room in anyone's mind. This was not an accident. It was a preference she had cultivated carefully over 6 years of civilian life, and it had served her well right up until the morning it saved her life. Dante Caruso had been buying flowers from her for 2 years. Not personally, technically. His administrative assistant placed the standing order, Tuesday deliveries to his offices in the Wicker Park building that officially housed a private equity firm and unofficially managed the financial architecture of arrangements with 6 city aldermen, 2 Port Authority officials, and a logistics network that moved things through the Chicago metro that did not appear on any manifest. White lilies, no exceptions, delivered by 10. But twice in those 2 years, Dante had walked into the shop himself, unannounced on Tuesday mornings, ostensibly to verify the order, actually for reasons he had not examined with any particular honesty. He was 41, lean and deliberate in the way of a man who had learned that imprecision was expensive. He ran his operation the way a surgeon runs a difficult procedure, quiet, no wasted motion, no sentiment attached to outcomes. The second time he came in, he stayed for 11 minutes. He watched Rosa walk an elderly man through the difference between garden roses and standard roses for an anniversary arrangement, her attention on him absolute and unhurried, as if the man's 43rd anniversary were the only thing in the world that mattered at that moment. Something in that quality of attention, the completeness of it, lodged in Dante's thinking for the rest of the week in a way he could not account for and did not try to. He did not act on it. He was not, by nature or by habit, a man who moved without knowing exactly what he was moving toward. Felix Rourke was a different kind of man entirely. Felix had run the Rourke crew out of Bridgeport for 15 years on a combination of inherited territory and the particular aggression of a person who knows, somewhere beneath their confidence, that they did not build what they are standing on. He was 53, thick through the neck, with small watchful eyes that categorized everything they landed on as either threat or leverage. His operation had been bleeding for 2 years, 2 federal indictments, 3 key earners flipped by prosecutors, 1 catastrophic warehouse fire that had cost him $4 million, and which he attributed with approximately 60% accuracy to Dante Caruso. He had been looking for a point of pressure ever since, something to use, some seam in Caruso's armor that he could put a blade into. Then one of his men pointed out Rosa Mancini. Florist on West Huron, his man said, supplies the Caruso offices every week personally. Caruso walked in himself twice in the last 2 months. Felix Rourke had not needed more information than that. In his experience, every powerful man had exactly one soft point, and soft points arrived in predictable configurations. He had filed the name away and began thinking about timing. He encountered her in person sooner than he had planned, and what he did with that encounter told you everything about the kind of man Felix Rourke was. The Chicago Floral Industry Showcase ran every September across 3 floors of the Merchandise Mart, and Rosa had exhibited for 4 years running. Felix's operation included a legitimate wholesale flower distribution arm, one of his cleaner revenue streams, and his operations manager attended annually. Felix himself almost never came. That September, for reasons he would have described as surveillance, but were also underneath about establishing hierarchy. Wherever he went, he made an exception. He found Rosa at her table in the early afternoon, mid-demonstration for a cluster of buyers. He moved through the crowd with the ease of a man accustomed to people stepping aside, stopped directly in front of her table, and looked at her the way a person looks at something they have already decided to dismiss. "Mancini blooms," he said, reading the sign. His voice was the kind of conversational loud that is designed to carry. The buyers near the table went still in the way people go still when they sense something edged approaching. "I've heard of you. Small shop, right? West Huron?" He let a beat pass. "I'm surprised you can afford the table fee here. This event runs steep." Another pause, and then the particular delivery of a man who uses the language of concern as a delivery system for cruelty. "Must be hard on you, though. Standing all day, at your size." The 2 men behind him produced the specific sound that is not laughter, but functions as permission. It licenses everyone nearby to decide the cruelty is acceptable, even funny. 2 buyers near the front looked at the floor. A woman at the edge of the crowd visibly flinched. Rosa set down the stem she had been holding. She looked at Felix Rourke with an expression that gave him nothing at all. Not anger, not the flash of wounded pride he had been hunting for, not the small collapse of confidence that would have told him he'd found the seam. She said, in a voice that was entirely level, "My prices are on the card at the front of the table. If you're not buying, I have customers who are." She picked up the stem and continued working. Felix Rourke's jaw tightened by a fraction. A woman who did not respond the way he expected was, in his understanding of the world, a problem of calibration. He simply hadn't pressed hard enough yet. He filed the moment away with the name and walked on. Psychologists who study public humiliation, particularly Dr. Linda Hartling at the Jean Baker Miller Training Institute, whose research on shame and dignity found that public shaming does not merely wound pride, but can fundamentally reshape a person's sense of professional worth for years, have noted that the most disorienting response for an aggressor is the absence of visible reaction. Not because the target feels nothing, but because withholding the reaction denies the aggressor the information he came for. Rosa had not learned this from research. She had learned it from 4 years in environments where displaying distress in front of the wrong person was operationally dangerous. The expression she had worn at that table was the same expression she had worn treating soldiers while taking fire. 3 tables away, half concealed behind a wide column, Dante Caruso had watched every second of it. He had not intended to attend the showcase. A logistics contact had a table and needed 5 minutes of his time on a matter of invoicing. Dante had arrived early and seen Rosa's signage from the entry, and had been standing near that column with a coffee when Felix walked to her table. He had recognized Felix immediately. He watched without moving, watched Felix's performance, watched the manufactured laughter, watched Rosa's stillness, watched Felix's jaw tighten when she didn't give him what he wanted. What he was watching was telling him a great deal about both of them. What he did not yet know was that Felix had already begun planning his next move. That the 5 unplanned minutes Felix had spent at the showcase that September afternoon had produced, in the particular logic of Felix Rourke's thinking, a decision about how Rosa Mancini would be used. Nobody in that building understood yet what had just been set into motion. The kidnapping happened on a Wednesday, 6 days later. 2 men Rosa had never seen before entered Mancini Blooms at 8:17 in the morning through the alley door, which had been locked. Rosa was in the back cooler rotating inventory. The fact that they had come through a locked door via the alley not the front, not when the shop was open, told her 4 things in the first 3 seconds. This was planned. They had preparation. They did not want witnesses, and they believed she would not be a problem. The larger one held up a phone displaying a photograph of Dante Caruso's building. "You're coming with us," he said. "Cooperate, and nobody gets hurt." Rosa looked at the phone. She looked at the 2 men. In the space of approximately 5 seconds, she had noted the larger one's weight distribution, forward on his left foot, which meant his right side was exposed, noted the second man's positioning and the subtle angle of his stance that suggested anxiety rather than training, counted the distance to the cold room door and the distance to the utility shelf to her left, and assessed the room for what was reachable and what wasn't. "Okay," she said, "let me get my jacket." The jacket was on a hook 6 feet away. She walked to it in a manner that communicated compliance and nothing else. While pulling it on, her body angled away from both men, she unlocked her phone screen and dialed her own voicemail. She set the phone to record ambient audio and slid it into her pocket in one continuous motion that took 4 seconds and looked like adjusting the jacket. Whatever happened next would be time-stamped and saved. They drove her to a warehouse in Cicero. 3 men total, including the driver. She was zip-tied to a chair in a back room and left alone while the men waited outside for a call from Felix Rourke confirming the asset was secured and that negotiations with Caruso could begin. During the 43 minutes she was left alone, Rosa Mancini got herself out of the zip tie using a release technique from a SERE course, Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape Training. She had taken as an adjunct to her medical certification in 2009. She then did something that separated trained people from untrained people in high-pressure situations. She waited. She waited because she had learned in environments that did not forgive impatience that timing was not a luxury. It was the difference between a successful outcome and a catastrophic one. She waited until she heard one set of footsteps moving away from her door and could estimate from the sound patterns that 2 men were positioned outside, not 3. The third was somewhere else in the building. What happened in the next 11 minutes would be described afterward by the one man who came out of that warehouse without medical assistance as, "I don't know." Everything happened very fast. This was accurate. Rosa had not been the fastest operator in her unit. She had been the most consistent, and she had continued training in the years since, not because she anticipated this, but because she had always understood that the version of the world in which nothing would ever require those skills was the version she hoped for, not the version she planned around. She used what was available: a metal stool, a fire extinguisher mounted near the door that she reached in the first 8 seconds. The complete absence of hesitation, which is the one thing undertrained people in high-stress situations almost never manage, because the body that has not drilled the movement spends critical fractions of a second negotiating with itself. When Dante Caruso arrived at that warehouse, 51 minutes after one of his monitoring operations intercepted a Rourke crew communication about a secured asset and a pending call, he came with 6 men and a plan for a hostage extraction. He came expecting to find a situation that required resolution. He came expecting to be necessary. I found Rosa standing outside the warehouse door in her florist's apron, one earring replaced with a small improvised backing she had fashioned from a piece of electrical tape found on a shelf inside. One of Felix's men was zip-tied to a support beam. The second was on the floor holding his knee and staring at the ceiling in the particular way of someone who has decided that staying very still is the only viable strategy remaining. The third, the driver, who had not been expecting to be operationally involved, was face down on the concrete, secured with his own belt. Rosa looked at Dante's 6 men. She looked at Dante. "I recorded the voicemail on my phone from inside," she said. "Ambient audio, their voices, a reference to Rourke by name. You'll want it before any official contact is made if you're going to handle this your own way first." She paused. There was also a laptop in the room. I looked at it. "I can tell you what I found." Dante Caruso stood completely still for what his security chief later estimated at 4 full seconds. Then he said, "Are you hurt?" "No," she said. "The one with the knee. I dislocated it and then set it after." He was in significant pain. "I didn't see the point of leaving him that way." John Gottman, whose 4 decades of research on human relationships produced some of the most rigorous findings in modern psychology on how people form and sustain genuine connection, identified what he called turning toward. The micro moments, invisible to outside observation, in which a person chooses presence over distance. These moments are almost never dramatic. Dante's 4 seconds of stillness before he asked whether she was hurt was, without either of them yet understanding it, one of those moments. He was not inquiring about a strategic asset. He was asking about her. The information Rosa had found on the laptop, financial routing documents, 2 shell company registration numbers, correspondence between Felix Rourke and a city official whose name Dante recognized immediately, was delivered to the appropriate federal channel through a route that could not be traced back to Caruso or to Rosa, assembled by Dante's people over the following 72 hours. The investigation that opened on Felix Rourke 10 days later was thorough, methodical, and left him no room at all. The warehouse fire he had attributed to Dante Caruso became, in the subsequent forensic accounting, a very different kind of problem attached to his own records. Felix Rourke, who had built his operation on the premise that power meant identifying the weaknesses in other people and applying pressure to them, discovered what it felt like when someone he had never considered a serious variable had been, the entire time, far more dangerous than anyone he had actually feared. 2 weeks after the warehouse, Dante walked into Mancini Bloom's on a Tuesday morning with nothing to claim as a pretext. Rosa was at the work table cutting stems. She didn't look up immediately. "I owe you an apology," Dante said. "Felix came after you because of me." "He came after me because he made an assumption," Rosa said, setting the stem down. "That's not the same thing as your fault." He was quiet for a moment in a way that didn't feel like the end of the conversation. "What was Kandahar like?" he said. She looked up then. She hadn't told him about Kandahar, which meant he had looked, and he was choosing to ask rather than to use. 2 deployments, she said. Special Ops medical attachment. It was. She paused and then said something honest. It was the clearest I've ever felt about what mattered. "I know the feeling," he said. It was, on the surface, a strange exchange for a man like Dante Caruso to have across the counter of a flower shop on a Tuesday morning. It was also, Rosa would understand later, exactly the right one. He had not asked what she had done, which would have been about her usefulness. He had asked what it was like, which was about her. There is a difference, and the people who understand that difference are rarer than almost anyone admits. She set down the cutting shears. Some debts are paid in money, some in protection, and some in the far more costly currency of genuinely seeing another person. Rosa Mancini had spent years being looked at and not seen. She recognized the alternative when it finally arrived. If that kind of underestimation, the kind that becomes someone's last strategic mistake, is a story that stays with you, leave a like. It takes 1 second and it tells me which stories to keep finding. Subscribe if you want the next one. There's a woman who walked into a room where no one expected her, and she left with everything they thought was theirs.